Greetings, gamers, ghosties, and campers. Tonight I'm bringing you the first episode of my new series, Tales from a Ghost Hunter. To give you a little bit of background, years ago, for about 11 plus years, me and some friends of mine were ghost hunters. And we experienced a lot of unusual things, encountered a lot of unusual things, and I'm going to recount that for you in this series. Now, a little bit of background on me. Before I went back to college is when we did all the ghost hunting. And even back then I had a scientific mind. I tried to rule out everything and explain everything before I called it paranormal or supernatural. And so even when I went back to college, I was trained even further in how to think like a scientist, with skills such as critical thinking, scientific method, experimentation, and observation. And so that's where I come from on the ghost hunting side. Like I said, I try to rule out everything before I call it supernatural or paranormal. And I believe that's a very important thing to do, so that you don't jump to conclusions or come up with explanations that don't exist. There are also two very important things that you have to be aware of when ghost hunting. One is the power of suggestion. That is when, like, if you know some information about the place you're going to, it can influence the perceptions you have when you're there. Also, it can influence the perceptions of the others with you. Also, the other thing is pareidolia, if I'm saying that correctly. A lot of you who dabble in the paranormal lore, shows, books, whatever, will know what that is. For those of you who don't, it's the brain trying to make sense of perceptions and create patterns to make sense of it where there aren't any, like such as like faces and photos and whatnot that aren't really there. That's those two very important things to remember when you're ghost hunting. So this first story takes place at a place called the Bulk House. Now, my friend James, who is a ghost hunter on many of the ghost hunts we went on, he's the one that called it that first. And from what I understand, the reason he called it the Bulk House was Bulk was the name of the owner of the house. Now, this house was a very run-down house. It had fallen into disrepair. It looked pretty abandoned. It was missing walls where all you saw were the studs. The kitchen floor wasn't there. All there was joists. So we had to be very careful when we were in there, especially me, because I'm a big guy, so I'd be extra careful. Now, the way the house was set up, it had a big gravel driveway off of a main road. It had a porch, and the stairs to the porch was not in the front, it was actually to the side of the house. There's a very large tree next to the house on that side. And there's lots of woods around it, so even at night it was very dark. Now, this house was located on a road going towards Capen Bridge, West Virginia. And currently, the house is no longer standing. It has been torn down. However, I have been back since it's been torn down, and it still feels like there are things tied to the land. Like there is still something there. But I didn't stick around long enough to try and figure out what. So, on to the first story. Now, the first story is called The Scream. My friend James had told me that he had heard the scream before, but I'd never thought I would ever hear it. But I was wrong. And it's something I will always remember. It was a dark night, wasn't stormy. There was no moon out, so there was not a whole lot of light. We had pulled up into the driveway. We had our flashlights on us. And when we went ghost hunting, it was long before people had all this ghost hunting equipment like EMF detectors and spirit boxes and all that. It was before the popularity of ghost hunting. It was before ghost hunting shows and all that. So it's way before that. So all we really had were old cameras and flashlights. That was the extent. Sometimes we had a digital recorder, sometimes. So that night, I was with a few of my friends. Trish was there, Jesse, my friend David, who came on a few of the hunts with us. He wasn't a regular. I think there was one more person, but I can't exactly remember who it was. It was a long time ago. So we were just standing out in the front yard in front of the house. We weren't too far from the porch. I'd say maybe 10, 15 feet from the porch. The door was open, which is odd because sometimes the door was closed and sometimes it was open when we went there. Now, we do know we weren't the only ones who ghost hunted there because we have encountered other ghost hunters there before. This night, the door was open. And we were just, like I said, out front, just casually talking with each other. Now, like I said, I am scientifically minded and I'm also very aware of my surroundings. And that night, when we were talking with each other, I noticed something very peculiar. What I noticed was when we were speaking with each other, my friend Trish, her voice was coming back from the house, but it wasn't quite like an echo. It sounded like she was in the house talking to us. But I didn't hear anybody else's voice coming back from the house like that. So I told the others what I was experiencing, and I decided to do an experiment. What I did was I had all of us line up in a horizontal line parallel to the house. Each one of us was going to yell at the house individually, one at a time. So we did this. I started. I yelled at the house, no echo. And we went down the line, each person, one at a time, yelling at the house. Nothing came back from the house. However, when it came to my friend Trish, well, she didn't yell at the house. She just spoke normally. Don't know what possessed her to do that, but she did. However, even speaking at a normal volume, her voice came back from the house. And it didn't sound like an echo. It sounded like she was right in the doorway talking to us. So we thought that was very peculiar. And I started getting really bad vibes. Like there was something not very malicious, but close to it in the house. And I did not like that feeling. Now, people have told me, people who've been on ghost hunts with me, people who claim to be psychic, have said that things tend to stay away from me. And my ghost hunting group, the ones I was in, came to believe this and believed that if I was there, no matter what they did, they'd be safe. And unfortunately, that got them to wanting to do stupid things. Like taunting, provoking, and whatnot like that. Stuff I wouldn't do myself. So that night when I said that I was getting bad vibes, I guess they took it as an invitation to go in the house and explore more. Well, I didn't want to go in the house. I really didn't want to go in the house. But they had already gotten on the porch. They were trying to coax me into the house with them, and I was refusing. And at some point, in front of that tree, I heard the scream. Now, what the scream is, from what I understand, from what we've come across, from the information we've come across, is this house existed back in the day when they had like horses and whatnot on the property, and apparently a little girl died at the house. What had happened was she was in front of that tree, and there was a horse there, and the horse apparently got spooked and bucked her, killed her right in front of that tree. Well, the scream that I heard came from right in front of that tree. And it's not necessarily a scream, that's just what we called it. It was really more of started out as a low moan and turned into a high-pitched wail. And it felt like it lasted for a long time, but in reality, it probably only lasted 20-30 seconds. And I've heard a lot of animal calls, and because I'm not just trained as a wildlife biologist, but I love being outdoors, and people who just are naturally outdoors, they pick up what animals sound like what. Well, I couldn't place this sound with any animal I ever heard of. And it sounded otherworldly. You can't even describe it. It just didn't sound natural. And me having the mindset that I have, I instantly shone my light at the tree. And you know where you can pinpoint where sound is coming from. Well, it was coming from directly in front of that tree, and that's where my light was shining, and there was nothing there. Nothing. And I even shone my flashlight around it to see if I could see any eye shine, see if there was any animals making that noise or what, but there was nothing. There was nothing, yet I could hear the sound coming from directly in front of that tree. And after it was done, I mean, when I heard it, it shot electricity throughout my body. All the hairs on my body stood up, and I was just feeling static electricity just going throughout my entire body, and I was frozen in place. However, after it stopped, I for some reason had the brass balls to go up to the tree. Because my friends James and Jesse were known pranksters on ghost hunts, so I had to be sure. I looked around the base of the tree, looked for any kind of recording device that could have made that sound. I looked for everything I could think of and came up with nothing. There was no reason there should have been a sound emitting from in front of that tree. And once I came to that conclusion, I held my hands up and said, that's it, I'm done for the night. Now, my friends, they were still on the porch when they heard it, because we all heard it. They were still on the porch, and when I said I was going to leave, they pretty much begged me to stay because they didn't feel safe without me. But I said, I don't care, I'm done. And we ended up all leaving. Now, in hindsight, I really wish we had some of the gear that ghost hunters have now for when that happened. I wish I could have recorded it. I wish I could have got some readings with an EMF detector, but we didn't have any of that stuff back then. But that was the scream. Now this next story is about the time I put my hands through a shadow person. Now, this also took place at the bulk house. That night, again, there was no moon, it was really dark. We had pulled up into the driveway. The cellar doors were open. You see, the cellar doors were directly in front of the front door in the porch. And a curious thing about those cellar doors is most of the times when we were there, they would be open, which is problematic because when they're open, there's a big hole in front of the front door. So obviously we close them. But a lot of times when we were getting ready to leave a ghost hunt, those cellar doors would be open again, and none of us had gone out and opened them. And that's the only way into the cellar. Well, we had to close the cellar doors at night. That night it was very, very active. There are entities there that I call tricksters because they'll mess with you. That night we were hearing a lot of things. We'd be on the first floor walking around investigating, and we would hear footsteps above us. Well, all of us would go up to the second floor to check it out, and while we're up there, we'd hear the footsteps below us. Sometimes we'd hear footsteps in the kitchen, and there's no floor in the kitchen. Another thing that happened on the first floor, I had gone into one of the main living areas that had a fireplace, and I was in there because I had sensed something in there, and I was just curious. And a lot of times I didn't have my flashlight on because back then I had excellent night vision. I didn't really need a light source too much, so I didn't have my light on. Trish was standing in the doorway of the room, and when I was in there, I all of a sudden felt something. I can only describe it as dark. Not so much visually, but as intent. But I felt it really close by, to the point where I asked Trish to turn her light on, because even though a light's not really going to protect you, it does make you feel better. So I asked her to turn her light on, and she refused. I did this probably 2 more times. Each time she refused, and each time I was more insistent, to the point I was almost yelling at her to turn her light on. Finally, I just had enough. I just left the room, and when I walked by her, I was like, "Why didn't you turn your light on?" And her response was, "It's because I hadn't told her what I was feeling in there." But her response was, "I didn't want to see it." Meaning she knew it was there too. Well, at some point during the night, because we were hearing all kinds of things, not just footsteps, but knocks. We would hear movement outside. A lot of times we attributed that to animals outside because this was a very rural area, so it wouldn't be unusual if there was deer roaming around outside, or possibly even a bear. So that's kind of what we contributed that to. But sometimes we'd hear noises on the front porch or the balcony above. So we started getting a little freaked out, to where we were huddled in the foyer of the main room where the front door is. And another friend of mine who would ghost hunt with us periodically was a guy I called Little John. His name is John. He is an African American man who's about 90 pounds soaking wet. He's just a little guy, thus the name Little John. Kind of short, but in this group, I was also the tallest person. So when I talked to people, I wasn't on eye level with them. They were on a lower eye level than I was. So there we were, huddled in the foyer, and I was in the middle and everyone else was around me. There was probably 5 of us that night. I can't remember all who were there, but I do know my friend Trish and Little John were there. Well, while we were huddled there, Little John was directly in front of me. And we had our lights out. And because all of us had our lights out in that one spot, it was pretty well lit. Well, all of a sudden, a shadow rose up in front of me to the point I'm looking up at something directly in front of me, and it rose directly in front of me, like from the floor, and I'm just standing there looking up at it, not knowing what I'm looking at. And since I'm the tallest one in the group, there should be no one there taller than me. And this was a figure. It was a shadowy figure. And I don't know what possessed me to do this. I don't know why I did it. But for some reason, my first reaction was to reach out for it. And I put my hands through it. And I ended up grabbing my friend Little John on the other side. Now, everybody else had been looking away from the group. So they didn't see this. Only I did. And when I grabbed Little John on the other side of this thing, he screamed, I screamed, we all screamed, because we were all freaked out at that point. And before anybody could turn around and look at it, it faded away. So when it showed up, it rose up in front of me, but when it disappeared, that's what it did. It faded away. But after putting my hands through it, my hands and my forearm up to about here was ice cold for a while. To the point I was rubbing my hands together, trying to warm them up. And I don't remember if I felt a static electricity or anything. I don't think I did. I think I just felt cold. And the shadow person didn't feel like anything. But it was definitely there. Unfortunately, I was the only one who saw it. So, who knows what I saw. Well, that's it for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you like this sort of thing, please like and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Have a spooky night.